Presented by PlayStation Days of Play.
Howdy, folks. I'm Kurt Davina. This is GameSpot, and I'm joined by a very special guest, the game director of
FBC Firebreak.
That is what we're calling it, FBC Firebreak.
I hope so.
Not the Federal Bureau of Control.
Yeah, just
Firebreak.
FBC.
FBC.
If you know, you know. It's very hip.
Yeah. There's a lot of F's and B's.
Yes, indeed.
And one C.
Yes. Somebody I think asked at some point if it was called Federal Bureau of Control FBC Firebreak. I was like, no, but you're on.
What if? Speaking chaos, chaos of names and letters and things, you are in the tail end. This game is about to come out.
Yes.
June 17th.
You got it.
How are you feeling?
Oh, well, I'm here, which is a nicer space than some people on the dev team right now. Fantastic. We're super excited. Obviously, like with all games, it's a miracle that it's come together and, feels good. I think one of the things people don't realize about games is that they're not fun for a really long time while you're making them, and you just have to kind of like hope. And I think like 80% of the game director's job is just convincing people that it's okay.
Good. Just trust
It's okay.
Just trust
I know it doesn't seem like it's okay. And then it all kind of comes in at the last second. And then, of course, that's when it's a gigantic scramble to make sure it's actually understandable and playable and all these other things. And
it's almost like people who try to understand the Remedy connected universe. You just have to trust.
Yeah, exactly.
Trust the art. That it's like, it'll make sense if you allow it to make sense.
Yeah.
As much as you want it to make sense. Because the more you claw at it, the worse it's going to get.
Right.
Is that what it's making that game?
I think it's close. I think I was just giving this example yesterday. Somebody was like, it's kind of like when you move house and you get started and everything just goes into the boxes and you write the rooms on the boxes and you feel very like, adult and organized. And then you're like, oh, I'm almost done. But then you realize you've just assembled this gigantic mountain of odd pieces and shapes, like a plunger and, some sort of kitchen implement that you don't use, but you can't lose any of it and none of it fits in a box anymore. And everything's suddenly so stressful, just this one tiny pile of things. And that's right around where we've been. It's like in the tornado of that last obnoxious pile of things. And
then you realize you've been talking to a room of Post-it notes.
Yes, exactly.
You're trying to explain something. Obviously, this is a huge shift for Remedy on like every single level.
Yeah.
Because it's a first-person shooter.
Yep.
Because it's a multiplayer game.
Yep.
You're self-publishing it.
Yep.
It's also coming to like Game Pass and like PS Plus and all the other things and Steam and Epic all at the same time.
Somehow.
How does that feel? Like to see, it's like Remedy has been. I've talked about this a lot. This sort of renaissance moment that Remedy's been in since Control, of like Remedy really coming into form and like really understanding its house style, what it is. So what is it like now to add this other hallway onto the house style?
It's crazy because a lot of the things that you're talking about are totally true, and they're also very like mechanical. But I think even like just emotionally, if you will, like the tone of the game is also very different, and the lack of kind of direct storytelling focus is also very different. So even on like a creative level, even before you even get into genre and online and all of the other things, extremely different. And then honestly, it's less so now, but it's a little intimidating kind of getting started. I think because a lot of people very naturally, people who make games are also gamers. And I think, going back to what you said about like the feelings about not wanting to be kind of this FOMO sort of like negative connotation live service thing is also part of the process in getting a game like this off the ground in a studio like Remedy, because anybody hears, oh, right, okay, it's like this online thing and we're known for this other thing. Like you're immediately skeptical. And by the way, I think people are right to be skeptical. Like I get skeptical. That's what we want to fight against, is that feeling that like people who play games, like, they just hear that stuff and they're like, oh, this is not for me. When for me, it's like, it's so funny because hearing that in a perfect world that a studio is like, yeah, cool, and then you get this game and hopefully you like it, and then we're going to give you even more game for free later. Like that should be joyful, but it's not. So I think part of it has been wanting to kind of do that, and then really embracing that attitude and making sure that the team has understood, like, hey, this is what we're doing. We're just making something that's fun. We're doing this like out of a passion and an interest in doing something different. I think has been a kind of a slow journey into people getting really excited. When we started the game, we were a very small internal team, and sometimes it felt like kind of like a lot of skepticism from being like, hey, do you want to come in and do this on the team or something? Maybe. And then, of course, by the end, people saw what the game was. They were playing it. They were asking to be on the team. We actually had to like kind of like turn people
back
away.
Off. Get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been very, very interesting. And now I think we're at the point where we feel like, it's not what Remedy is known for, but we're hoping that once it comes out, it doesn't detract from anything Remedy is known for, but it expands the definition of what Remedy can be and the type of people that it can kind of, cater to and entertain.
Yeah, if I may ask, like how much can you tell me about even the conception of this thing? Like was it just we gotta make a multiplayer? How did that happen?
This is a fair question, and like all conception stories are messy. I think I love the fiction that it's like Mad Men, and some creative bursts into the boardroom and is like, let me tell you,
I played this game over the weekend.
Here's what we're gonna do.
We're gonna completely pivot.
Yeah. So it's a very long, messy, boring story. But I will say at the heart of the question, really, Remedy used to kind of produce one game at a time and disappear into a hole, come out with something hopefully pretty interesting, people like it, disappear, etc. And then Remedy kind of grew and became a multi-project studio. And once you're kind of working on games like Control and Alan Wake, and you've really gotten decades behind you making those type of experiences, it's great, and you should keep doing that because that's what players want and it's what players deserve and they expect. But also, once you have that ability to be doing different things, the studio's filled with lots of creative people and people who have a lot of different interests. And some of them just said like, hey, this is something that we're just interested in. Can we try this out? Prototype things,
I'm sure
get it
you
together.
all go home and you play multiplayer games with people, with your friends and family and all that jazz.
Exactly. I grew up playing games like Ultima Online and things where I think I just learned really early on the kind of like chaotic, unpredictable storytelling that people can bring into a world. And you can have that really cool, like narratively realized space, this immersive space. But at least right now, it's very hard unless you go absolutely wild brute force, like Baldur's Gate 3 or something like that, to like really make something feel as reactive as people. And of course, people have their downsides as well. But if you have the right game and the right place to funnel that energy, there's something just very magical that you can't do in single player. So for us, I think it was like a really interesting challenge to say, hey, like, what happens when we invite that thing that we can't control, no pun intended, into a space that we've built?
I want to pick your brain. Is there a magical balance like that you considered when you go into something like FBC and you're like, well, I want to make a multiplayer game. I love storytelling and I love the happenstance storytelling that happens in those games. Is there like a magical chemistry sort of science thing you've figured out to be able to make those things work and happen in a way that can benefit an artistic touch?
I think like when you really look at like narrative and people talk about Remedy being very like story focused, but I would say Remedy is more narrative focused. I know this is like epic splitting hairs here, sorry.
Yeah.
But I'll split this hair for this reason because I think that narrative is kind of two pieces. Like one is space and one is time, and I think space is like a series of facts. Like there is a castle, there is a dragon, it is the year 1347, there is a king, etc. And then story is sort of applying time to the space, right? Where it's like, well, first the dragon flew to the castle and then the king ordered the guard to shoot the dragon, etc. And so once you have like these if-then statements, you start getting into actual storytelling, right? Like the moment-to-moment time of what's happening. So for a game like Firebreak, we are still very narratively rich in the sense of space, right? Like that side of narrative, like we still embrace very, very, very heavily. But the thing is that when players jump into that space, they are that timeline. They are having conversations. By the way, sometimes they're having conversations about nonsense. Like they're talking about, boyfriends or work or any other number of things. And so if you are also telling a story on top of them, you are suddenly competing for that time space inside of the narrative. I told you it was going to get a little nerdy, sorry. And so we're very, very careful about not doing that. So the balance really is to say, like, how do we make sure that we're not interrupting or fighting for that kind of part of the narrative space with them? And then how are we also making sure that even outside of like mic chat, players aren't faced with like needing to kind of go through and absorb this large headwind of narrative to enjoy something that ultimately might be played again against the backdrop of complaining about your boss or something like that. And so that was the start, was to say, like, let's not put any forced strong storytelling in front of players. And I know people love trust me, I love strong storytelling. There's no problem with storytelling. It's just for this type of experience, it's a little tough. So that led us to kind of look at like, well, how do you do what I call like storytelling in small spaces? Like, where are the appropriate places to put it in? All the loading screens in the game are new and canonical documents for the FBC, for the Control universe. super fun. We have like voice packs in the game, like, or as I guess more of a dev term, but like, barks, like people say reloading, things like this, right? But we actually turned voice packs into like a customization option. And those voice packs have over like 500 custom lines and narrative lines. And they're actually spaced out to happen pretty infrequently. And you can play for 10 or 20 hours and still hear new things. And there are some subtexts and there are some interesting stories. And I think the super nerds, of which there are at least a couple, will find these things and find things to put together. But it's going to be something that you need to go like actively find, as opposed to like a sort of like wall between you and the gameplay.
I'm telling you, GameSpot's Mark Delaney, the Remedy super nerd, is going to find all of them, whether you like it or not. I don't know how Mark's going to do it, because that man has like a family and other responsibilities, but he will do it. As a diehard Remedy fan, when I first heard the idea of Control being turned into a multiplayer thing, admittedly, I could not envision it. I was just like, so you're going to be a bunch of Jessies like flying around, like shooting, like how is this going to work? But I think you did something brilliant in trying to take it away from that scope and actually look at the people who are going to work, and they're actually going to the FBC and have to clean up the mess that happens. Because I always love the idea of like, well, who cleans up all the bodies that are shot up in the hallways after this? And I think this game has done a really remarkable job of answering that question in a way that feels authentically like Remedy and like authentically unique and distinct. Yeah,
thanks. It was a big focus of ours, and it took us a little while to kind of focus on like, or find that focus on the fantasy and the player fantasy. And you mentioned a bunch of Jessies flying around, and actually there is a piece of concept like this is just people experimenting of like a bunch of crazy looking people with like Matrix hairdos like throwing things around as part of the exploration. Like it went all over the place, and of course we had our very really early concept art, which looked like just Rangers kind of waiting with like a take a number thing. And of course we didn't really land in either of those places, like, but it really came down to the idea that Jessie is so cool, she's so special, and she's basically like a superhero. And like, do you really want to say, oh, okay, well, she's special, but also here are these 7,000 other people, and one of them is teabagging somebody, and like, it's like, it just feels wrong.
Jessie, what are you doing? What happened? You're the director.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And so that's when we kind of said, oh, okay, well, the bureau is filled with literal like bureaucrats and people, and like and at least in the US, I thought a lot about firefighters, and it was wild to me when I discovered at some point that like more than half of firefighters in the US aren't even paid. Like they're just people who.
This would be these.
It's literally what the thought was. Is like somebody who like might go to Burger King during the day and is like, oh, I'm just gonna go risk my entire life tonight to like save something, and then just put on this crazy suit, get these weird tools, go do this incredibly heroic thing, and the next day be like, clock you back into my shift. And that's incredible to me. Like even aside from obviously like like the heroics generally speaking, but just that like literal like almost like vigilante superhero idea of but also somebody who's like not necessarily specially trained. I mean, obviously there is some training and stuff. I'm just saying it's like you're not like an elite super soldier.
Well, having played it and just having your loadout of like big mechanical thing you're shooting, the camaraderie and goofiness of it was like perfect.
Oh, cool.
As we come to a close, way to go. You're nearly there. Hang on.
You too.
FBC, Firebreak, bash whoever you want, as long as you're just clocking in, taking care of the post-its, and getting out of there. Mike, it was awesome.
Hey, awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that's all. This is GameSpot. I'm Kurt. That was Mike. This was presented by PlayStation Days of Play. For all that jazz and more Firebreak, FBC Firebreak stuff, Okay. See ya.